And it's 6:41. Just a quick time check for you as you're getting ready to make your way on out of the house. And you can take us with you when you go, because you can get us on the radio on your mobile phone, or you can even watch us on our app, which you can get from iTunes or Google Play. Just do a search for Sky 995 FM. On the line with us, attorney at law, legal expert Martin George. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Hi, good morning to you, Jesse.
Morning, Mr.
Good
George.
morning, Dr. Wayne. Good morning, Edison.
Yes, Martin George, you've seen the furor over the last few days with regard to the situation with the Port of Spain Mayor Raymond Timke, and there also was a great deal of activity in social media with regard to the domestic violence case at Sharon's Auto, and we're seeing some activism taking place in social media, and people in high places responding to this activism.
Mm-hmm.
From a legal standpoint, what are we dealing with here exactly?
Well, as regards the Mayor Port of Spain scenario, I think that it is an interesting one, because certainly when you look at the statement that was made and the context within which it was framed, one could easily understand the anger and the feelings of hurt and disappointment that persons would have felt. But, Jessime, I have always said we have to be careful in this country, because it appears that there's always a rush to say that persons must resign from office. I recall in the last administration, in fact, I spoke on your program many times on issues such as this, where there were calls for Wade Mark to resign. Mm-hmm. I think every Monday morning there was a call for the former Prime Minister to resign. There were constant calls, I think, maybe on a daily basis, for former Attorney General Anand Ramlogan to resign. So it appears to be a mantra that we have developed, that the slightest thing we see that is wrong, and that was indisputably wrong, that our automatic call is for the office holder to resign. Now, the thing is, I'm not saying that it doesn't merit resignation, but I would want us to always ensure, first of all, that we look at other possible options, and then if you recognize that the other options are not sufficient, then you can say, well, look, yes, a call for resignation is merited, but it must not just be a knee-jerk reaction that everything that happens, we say the person must resign. As I say, in this case, yes, there was clearly something wrong, and the mayor has taken a decision to resign, and that's great. There's no problem with that. But I just think that we need to be a little bit more cautious, because we're developing into a society that is so quick to rush to judgment that, it's almost like, there's a baying for blood. I wonder, the same persons who were so, vigilant, protesting outside the mayor's office, have they been expending that type of energy and effort to say, well, look, let's protest against violence against, women in general, or persons in the society in general, or let's launch a protest to see that the police find the killer?
None of that has happened.
The main culprit and the main villain in the piece, as far as I'm concerned. So the thing is, it appears that we've all gone down a road of, an issue which is not, to me, the fundamental problem here. The fundamental problem here is the level of unacceptable violence in this society, the fact that persons can be killed, in such a manner, and up to now, the police have not been able to arrest anyone.
Indeed.
So while I appreciate the stance taken by the mayor, and I applaud him for it, I would simply ask Trinidad and Tobago, let us not get sidetracked by that issue and forget the fundamentals, which would be that a human life was lost needlessly, tragically, and rather graphically, and the person or persons responsible are still out there walking free. That to me is even more troubling. That is the real violence that has occurred, and that's the real travesty in the scenario.
I do think, Mr. George, because of the anonymous nature of posting stuff online and so on, people who may have an agenda, whether they're self-righteous or not, feel that they can say anything they want and sort of drum up a kind of lynch mob because of the anonymous nature of doing that sort of thing online.
Well, it's two things. Apart from the anonymity, there's also the question of the phenomenal reach that you have, the ease of access. You could wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, be in your pajamas or your sleepwear, and you are there on your computer and you just send out a blurb and it reaches millions of people instantly. So, the tremendous power of social media, it's good in one way, but it has so much potential for abuse in another way that we have to always make a fine distinction and ensure that we perform a balancing act in terms of the power and the responsibility that goes with that power. Now, one of the good things about it is that, look, it allows us to shine a spotlight on some illegal activities which are occurring, and I guess in a, home or domestic situation, if it is that someone doesn't have a means otherwise to get their story told, yes, it's phenomenal that you can do so via social media. But then what we have is you have hundreds of people now jumping in on the issue, pronouncing on it, rushing to judgment when they haven't heard the other side. There hasn't been any court matter. Nobody has been charged yet. So I always say, listen, while, of course, if it is that those things did happen, that is clearly wrong, we must then still be careful to allow the judicial process to take its place and take its course and not use this as a means of basically having, street justice, so to speak. And that is exactly what you're asking about, because the point is, persons, they jump on social media and they pronounce judgment and execution in these matters when really and truly, unfortunately, we have to remember that we still have a judicial process and a legal system which we must still respect.
As you make that point about the justice system, Martin George, we had this conversation already where we raised the issue of, any jury who'd be adjudicating in a case coming out of a matter that had been bandied about in social media, having been influenced, having had their minds poisoned, regardless of whatever evidence is put before them, being heavily influenced by what they would have seen in social media. And while we know that ideally the jury should disregard everything else but the evidence that was laid before them in court and the arguments that were made in court, the reality is that the world is wide open now, and they can't escape all these other influences that could have an impact on their decision making.
That is the truth, and the point is we have to recognize that even if you sequester a jury, you have them, locked away at a hotel for the entire duration of a trial, the point is, unless you try to go the next step of saying that you are going to seize their personal mobile devices, which you can't, then you really are stopping nothing, because they are getting all the information there. Even in the hotel lobby, there would be computers that are available for use that you could log on. So the thing is, it really comes down to a question of responsibility, because you could never police each and every individual 24 hours of the day to know what they have access to, what is being influencing them. So it really comes down to a question of, I guess, a judge, emphasizing to them that, look, I know you would have heard things, you know. So you really have to start off on that premise. Eh? You can't say, well, if you may have heard. You have to assume, yes, they must have heard something.
And very quickly, if it turns out that many of these allegations or so on are true, or if it turns out that someone is proven untrue rather, and if it turns out that someone is innocent of the charges that have been laid against them via social media and they've been vilified, their career shattered and destroyed, their reputation crushed, who gets to sue and who do they sue? You know, after you've been run through the mill like that, who do you sue?
If it is that,
how do you get justice?
If it is that you are able to identify specific persons or individuals, and of course, once you get around or get past the anonymity issue, as Dr. Wayne mentioned, you would be able, if it can be proven that someone posted and published something deliberately false and defamatory about you, you would be able to take legal action. As I said, we have already in Trinidad and Tobago the precedent for that, which is where Emil Elias and NH International, they brought action against a blogger who was online, Mr. Reynald, and Mr. Reynald was saying things about Mr. Elias and his company, and it was just all online, but the point is Mr. Elias was able to file a court action in defamation, and he won. So we have actually on our law books already cyber defamation cases which have been successful. So I keep warning the general public, and I keep saying, and I think in your shows, I am sure you guys do repeat that, that we have to be careful in terms of the comments we make. The point is, yes, you can express your outrage at something like this happening, but unless you have clear and uncontrovertible proof, and there's a difference between evidence and proof. There's a difference between information and proof. So unless you have uncontrovertible proof, then you have to temper your comments. You could condemn the actions, but then to go the other step and condemn the individual in a rush to judgment is something I would always be loath to do. And I would always encourage persons to not go that extra step.
Now, Mr. George, the lady in question here in the Facebook issue, she has produced this evidence and is alleged that this is not the most recent attack. She has been posting pictures from the last few years. Mm-hmm. Can that be brought into a court? And because you mentioned it's evidence, but it has to be proven that the man or the attacker or husband or common law, whatever it is, he was the one who actually inflicted these wounds. How can you prove that?
Just to add on to that, Martin George, apparently there was a recent attack on Ash Wednesday, right. And she would have had to go to the hospital to get treatment for that attack.
Okay, all right. I would just like to say, though, that I would speak in generalized terms in answering, and I am making absolutely no reference to this
specific case.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Just to respect the process.
Yeah.
So what I would say is that if it is that you're talking about things from years ago, then the first thing you ought to have is some proof, either by way of medical reports, which is why it is always so important. If you are a victim in such circumstances, and I will tell you, from my experience in courts, there are men who are victims of physical domestic violence abuse also. So whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whether you're a child, husband, father, wife, mother, whoever, once you are a victim in those circumstances, the first thing that you must lock down is your proof. So in other words, you must get a medical report from a qualified medical practitioner. Because I'll tell you, the difficulty with photographs is that your proof that these photographs represent what actually happened is always difficult, because there's the question of persons who are on the defense team who would be able to raise issues. Well, look, there's something called Photoshop where you can touch up photos, you can alter things. So therefore, how can a court accept this photograph as your proof? So therefore, the best thing is always a medical certificate from a doctor who can certify that, look, on such and such day, I examined this patient and I observed. And then they would now list out the things that they observed. That is something that a court will accept, without more, and say, well, yes, this is the proof that you did receive some injury. Of course, the next step would be who caused the injury. And that's where you will now have to give your evidence in support of that. But the point is, the first fundamental in cases of physical abuse or physical violence would be a medical report. No matter how trivial or small you may think the injury is, once you have that examination by a medical practitioner and the issuing of a certificate, even if it is that the incident occurred 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you would still be able to bring that forth and say, well, look, on the basis of this, which occurred on such and such day, and I was examined, and of course you need to be examined within a reasonably proximate time to the occurrence of the injury. You can't wait, 3-4 months down the road and say, well, I'm now going to get examined. So you also need to bear that in mind. So it has to be a reasonably proximate time that you would have, done the medical examination, have your report, and that is always your most fundamental basis for starting an investigation and being able to build a case.
Can a husband, the alleged attacker here, on his defense, use provocation, that he was provoked by her, she scratched him as the case might be, and he retaliated? Would that be accepted as evidence or into evidence? Should he be charged?
Well, the thing is, again, I will speak generally. I am not speaking about any specific matter.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So the general question is provocation a defense?
Yes, the provocation can be raised as your basis for maybe explaining why you reacted in that way. But it goes more to mitigation rather than exoneration and exculpation. In other words, you cannot say, well, look, because this person provoked me, I beat them half to death, that kind of thing. The provocation goes towards mitigation so the court may understand, well, okay, we understand that you were triggered to react.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't in and of itself excuse your action.
Necessitate your action.
Yes,
okay,
that's right.
So it can't be used in the defense. Well, I tried to defended myself by, she came at me with some water or whatever. Okay.
That's right. So if we could just take it to the other extreme. Say, for instance, if you
Martin George, I'm so sorry, but we have no more time left. I'm so sorry.
All right, great.
But
no
thank you for squeezing in some time for us this morning.
Have a great day. Take care.
All right, that was Attorney at Law Martin George and member of the Police Service Commission weighing in. And thanks to Republic Bank Limited for making our news updates in this hour possible.
The all-new Sky 99.5 FM. Inform, inspire, empower.